In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all documents related to the agency's mind control programs. Thousands of files were shredded, burned, and disposed of, evidence of experiments so ethically compromised that even the CIA's own leadership wanted them buried forever. But some documents survived, hidden in budget records and forgotten filing cabinets. When these papers finally surfaced years later, they revealed programs that seemed too bizarre and sinister to be real. Government scientists testing occult rituals, dosing unwitting citizens with experimental drugs, and attempting to create chemical agents that could induce specific behavioral changes or mental states. Among these revelations was Project MKOFTEN, perhaps the strangest and most disturbing program in the CIA's arsenal of mind control research. While its better-known predecessor, MKULTRA, focused primarily on LSD and hypnosis, MKOFTEN ventured into darker territory, exploring whether witchcraft, voodoo, and other occult practices had any basis in manipulable brain chemistry, testing obscure toxins from around the world, and developing compounds that could influence behavior in ways that seemed like magic. This is the story of how America's intelligence agency spent millions of dollars investigating whether they could literally weaponize black magic, and what they actually discovered in the process. To understand how a government agency ended up seriously investigating voodoo and witchcraft, we need to understand the atmosphere of the 1960s Cold War. The United States and Soviet Union weren't just competing militarily and economically, they were engaged in what some called a war for the mind. American intelligence agencies believed, or claimed to believe, that communist adversaries had developed sophisticated techniques for controlling human behavior. Reports, many later proven false or exaggerated, suggested that Chinese and North Korean interrogators had brainwashed American POWs during the Korean War, turning loyal soldiers into communist sympathizers. The Soviets were rumored to be experimenting with drugs, hypnosis, and psychological conditioning techniques. The infamous Manchurian candidate scenario, the idea that enemy agents could program sleeper assassins, seemed plausible to paranoid intelligence officials. The CIA concluded that America needed its own mind control capabilities, both to defend against enemy techniques and to develop offensive capabilities. Thus began a sprawling array of covert programs with cryptic code names: Artichoke, Bluebird, MKUltra, and eventually MKOFTEN. MKUltra, launched in 1953, became the umbrella program for the CIA's mind control research. Under MKUltra, agency scientists tested LSD on unwitting subjects, including their own colleagues, funded university research into hypnosis and sensory deprivation, and explored everything from electroshock to surgical brain modification. The program operated with virtually no oversight, using front organizations to hide the CIA's involvement and often conducting experiments that blatantly violated medical ethics and human rights. By the mid-1960s, MKUltra had largely failed to produce the breakthroughs its architects had promised. LSD proved too unpredictable for use as a truth serum or mind control drug. Hypnosis couldn't reliably create the programmed assassins that Cold War fiction imagined. But rather than abandoning mind control research, the CIA simply shifted focus, which is where MKOFTEN enters the story. Project MKOFTEN was officially authorized in 1966, though planning had begun earlier. The program's stated purpose, according to declassified documents, was to test the toxicological, transmissive, and behavioral effects of drugs in animals and humans, with emphasis on exotic compounds that could alter behavior in specific ways. But MKOFTEN went beyond conventional pharmacology. The program specifically investigated substances and practices associated with folk magic, witchcraft, and indigenous spiritual traditions. Not because CIA scientists believed in supernatural forces, but because they theorized that these practices might have discoverable biochemical bases that could be isolated, synthesized, and weaponized. The logic went something like this. If voodoo practitioners in Haiti could genuinely induce zombie-like states in victims, as some anthropological studies have shown, reports suggested, there must be a chemical mechanism, perhaps a toxin that produced catalepsy, suggestibility, or memory loss. If shamans in South America could induce powerful visions and behavioral changes with plant preparations, those compounds might be useful intelligence tools. If medieval European accounts of witches' flying ointments had any factual basis, they might contain psychoactive substances worth investigating. This approach, treating folklore and occult practices as potential leads for discovering psychoactive substances, wasn't entirely unreasonable from a scientific perspective. Many legitimate drugs have been discovered by investigating traditional remedies and practices. The difference was in the CIA's methods and intentions. MKOFTEN's primary research facility was the Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, an Army chemical weapons testing site. Here, CIA-funded scientists conducted experiments that blurred the line between research and torture, between science and human rights violations. The Edgewood Arsenal had a long history of controversial research. During and after World War II, it had been a center for chemical weapons development. By the 1960s, it hosted a variety of classified programs testing everything from nerve agents to incapacitating chemicals on military volunteers, though volunteer is a generous term for soldiers who were often pressured to participate and rarely given full information about what they were being exposed to. Under MKOFTEN, the Arsenal's research took on an even more sinister character. Declassified documents reveal that researchers tested hundreds of compounds, including exotic plant toxins from around the world, including poisons used in indigenous hunting and ritual practices. Scientists collected samples from Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, testing their effects on animals and, in some cases, human subjects. Synthetic compounds designed to mimic the effects of naturally occurring toxins, but with more predictable and controllable properties. These included agents intended to produce confusion, fear, paranoia, or compliance. Biological agents that could alter mental states or behavior. Some researchers explored whether certain bacteria or viruses might produce psychiatric symptoms that could be weaponized. Combination substances mixing multiple compounds to achieve specific behavioral effects. For example, researchers experimented with combinations that might make subjects highly suggestible while also impairing their memory of the experience. The human testing protocols were especially troubling. While some experiments used military volunteers, albeit with questionable consent procedures, others appear to have involved unwitting subjects. Documents reference testing on terminal cancer patients and individuals in institutional settings who likely had no idea they were participating in CIA experiments. One of MKOFTEN's most documented efforts involved investigating the alleged zombie powder of Haitian voodoo practice. Anthropological accounts described bokors, voodoo sorcerers, who could supposedly turn victims into zombies, mindless, compliant individuals with no will of their own. CIA scientists theorized that if this phenomenon was real, it probably involved a powerful toxin that produced a death-like state, followed by severe neurological damage. The agency funded several researchers to investigate Haitian voodoo practices and collect samples of substances used in alleged zombification rituals. What they found was fascinating from a toxicological perspective, even if it didn't produce a practical intelligence tool. The zombie powder did contain a potent cocktail of toxins, most notably tetrodotoxin, the same neurotoxin found in pufferfish that Japanese fugu chefs must carefully avoid. Tetrodotoxin can produce a death-like state of paralysis while leaving the victim conscious, and survivors sometimes experience lasting neurological damage. The CIA's researchers concluded that voodoo zombies were probably real people who had been poisoned with tetrodotoxin, buried alive or left for dead, then dug up before they actually died. The resulting brain damage from oxygen deprivation, combined with psychological trauma and possibly additional drugging, could produce the zombie-like behavior described in folklore. From a scientific standpoint, this was a legitimate discovery that eventually contributed to our understanding of both the toxin and certain neurological conditions. But the CIA's interest was less academic. They wanted to know if similar techniques could be used for intelligence purposes. Could you create a compliant, damaged individual who would follow orders? Could you fake someone's death and then resurrect them under your control? The practical problems with weaponizing this approach were substantial. The dose needed to produce the death-like state without actually killing the victim was difficult to calibrate. Many victims would simply die, and survivors would be too damaged to be useful. Nevertheless, the research continued, with scientists testing tetrodotoxin and similar compounds on animals, and possibly humans. Another MKOFTEN line of investigation focused on the medieval European accounts of witches' flying ointment, substances that witches allegedly rubbed on their bodies to fly to Sabbaths and experience various supernatural phenomena. Inquisition records and folk accounts described these ointments producing sensations of flight, time distortion, and encounters with demons or spirits. Modern scholars had long suspected these accounts described hallucinogenic experiences rather than literal flight. MKOFTEN researchers wanted to identify the chemical basis for these experiences and determine if similar compounds could be useful intelligence tools. They discovered that medieval flying ointments likely contained a mixture of psychoactive plants from the nightshade family, including belladonna, henbane, and mandrake. These plants contain tropane alkaloids like atropine and scopolamine, which can produce powerful hallucinations, delirium, and out-of-body sensations when absorbed through the skin. Scopolamine particularly interested the researchers. In certain doses, it produces amnesia and suggestibility. The victim remains conscious and can follow instructions, but later has no memory of what happened. This property had already led to scopolamine's use and abuse as a truth serum in interrogations. But MKOFTEN scientists wanted to refine its application and combine it with other substances to achieve even more specific behavioral effects. Declassified documents describe experiments testing scopolamine derivatives and combinations on both animals and human subjects. The goal was to create a chemical agent that could be delivered covertly, through aerosol, absorbed through skin, or slipped into food or drink, that would make targets compliant and amnesiac. Essentially, they were trying to create a real-life forget-me-now drug that would also make victims do what they were told. One of the most disturbing aspects of MKOFTEN was its investigation into what were euphemistically called ethnic weapons, chemical or biological agents that would supposedly affect different racial or ethnic groups differently. This line of research was rooted in pseudoscientific racism and represented perhaps the darkest corner of the program. The theory, such as it was, suggested that genetic differences between ethnic groups might create vulnerabilities to specific toxins or drugs. CIA scientists explored whether they could develop agents that would be more effective against, say, Asian or African populations, while leaving Caucasians relatively unaffected. This research echoed the worst elements of Nazi human experimentation and reflected the racial prejudices embedded in American intelligence agencies. While the biological premise was fundamentally flawed, human genetic variation doesn't divide neatly along racial lines in ways that would make ethnic weapons feasible. The effort to develop such weapons revealed the moral bankruptcy of programs operating without oversight or ethical constraints. Some MKOFTEN documents reference testing compounds on subjects of different ethnic backgrounds to assess differential effects. The details of these experiments remain largely classified, but the mere existence of this research represents a profound violation of human dignity and scientific ethics. Project MKOFTEN operated in secrecy until the mid-1970s, when a series of events began exposing the CIA's mind control programs to public scrutiny. The Watergate scandal had shaken public trust in government and emboldened investigative journalists and congressional oversight committees. In December 1974, the New York Times published Seymour Hersh's explosive article, revealing that the CIA had conducted illegal domestic operations, including experiments on unwitting American citizens. This triggered a cascade of investigations that eventually uncovered MKULTRA, MKOFTEN, and related programs. When CIA Director Richard Helms learned that investigations were intensifying, he ordered the destruction of MKULTRA and MKOFTEN records. Most files were successfully destroyed, but some survived in budget records and other administrative files that weren't marked as part of the programs. These surviving documents, released through Freedom of Information Act requests over subsequent decades, provide our fragmentary knowledge of what these programs actually did. Congressional hearings in 1975 and 1977, led by Senator Frank Church and others, exposed shocking details about CIA mind control programs. Witnesses testified about being dosed with LSD without their knowledge, about subjects who had committed suicide or suffered lasting psychological damage, and about research that violated every principle of informed consent and medical ethics. What emerged was a picture of intelligence agencies operating as rogue entities, accountable to no one, conducting experiments that would have been recognized as war crimes if performed by enemies. The Church Committee concluded that the CIA had violated the trust of the American people and recommended sweeping reforms to intelligence oversight. Project MKOFTEN might seem like a relic of Cold War paranoia, but its lessons remain disturbingly relevant. Today, neuroscience and pharmacology have advanced far beyond what 1960s researchers could have imagined. We have drugs that can enhance cognition, modify memory, or alter mood with increasing precision. Neurotechnology like transcranial magnetic stimulation can temporarily alter brain function. Brain-computer interfaces are transitioning from science fiction to reality. These advances raise questions that echo the MKOFTEN era. How should powerful tools for altering consciousness and behavior be controlled? Who decides which uses are legitimate and which are abuses? What protections exist for vulnerable populations who might be exploited in research? How do we balance scientific progress with ethical constraints? The MKOFTEN story also reminds us of the danger of national security justifications for unethical actions. The CIA argued that mind control research was necessary to keep pace with enemies, that the stakes were too high to be constrained by normal ethical rules. This logic, that ends justify means when national security is at stake, has been used to justify torture, warrantless surveillance, and other violations of rights and norms. Perhaps most importantly, MKOFTEN demonstrates the importance of oversight and transparency in government research. The programs operated in near total secrecy, with minimal oversight, answerable essentially to no one. This lack of accountability enabled and encouraged ethical violations that would have been immediately recognized as unacceptable in open, reviewed research. Despite millions of dollars and years of research, the CIA never achieved the mind control capabilities its scientists sought. The human mind proved more complex, more resilient, and ultimately more mysterious than Cold War researchers imagined. You can drug someone, traumatize them, confuse them, or damage their brain, but you cannot reliably and predictably control their thoughts and behaviors, like programming a computer. This might be the most hopeful lesson from this dark chapter. Human consciousness and free will are more robust than we sometimes fear. Even under extreme chemical and psychological assault, people retain something essentially human that resists total control. But this doesn't mean the MKOFTEN story has a happy ending. Real people were harmed, rights were violated, and dangerous precedents were set. The full extent of what was done may never be known, given the successful destruction of most records. Victims were never adequately compensated, or even acknowledged in many cases. As neuroscience continues advancing, as new technologies for altering consciousness emerge, we must remember MKOFTEN, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a call to vigilance. The same justifications that enabled these programs could enable similar abuses in the future. Only transparent oversight, robust ethical frameworks, and a commitment to human dignity can prevent history from repeating itself. The CIA's darkest secret wasn't that they investigated voodoo and witchcraft. It was that in pursuit of power over the mind, they abandoned the ethical principles that should constrain all human research. The real black magic wasn't in Haitian powders or medieval ointments. It was in the institutional capacity to dehumanize and exploit people in the name of national security, to conduct experiments that violated basic human rights, and to operate in shadows deep enough that accountability never arrived. That dark magic, unfortunately, hasn't been completely banished. It lurks wherever power operates without oversight. wherever national security arguments override ethical constraints, wherever the vulnerable are seen as acceptable subjects for exploitation. Remembering MKOFTEN means staying alert to its echoes in our own time. If you found this journey into one of the CIA's strangest and most disturbing programs as eye-opening as we did researching it, please subscribe to this channel. We dig into the declassified documents, forgotten testimonies, and hidden histories that reveal uncomfortable truths about power, science, and ethics. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future deep dives into the secret programs, covered-up experiments, and ethical questions that continue to shape our world. And drop a comment below. What other classified programs deserve more attention? What ethical lines should never be crossed, even in the name of national security? Thanks for watching, and remember, the best defense against abuses of power is an informed public that refuses to forget. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep asking questions.